I've got an amazing bio to read out as Dr. Shiva takes to the stage. And let me share this with you. Dr. Shiva is trained as a physicist and did her PhD on the subject of hidden variables and non-locality in quantum theory from the University of Western Ontario in Canada. She later shifted to interdisciplinary research in science, technology and environmental policy, which she carried out at the Indian Institute of Science and the Indian Institute of Management in Bangalore. In 1982, she founded an independent institute, the Research Foundation for Science, Technology and Ecology in Dehradun, dedicated to high quality and independent research to address the most significant ecological and social issues of our times, in close partnership with local communities and social movements. In 1991, she founded Navdanya, a national movement to protect the diversity and integrity of living resources, especially native seed, and the promotion of organic farming and fair trade. Forbes magazine in November 2010 has identified Dr. Vandana Shiva as one of the top 7 most powerful women on the globe. Dr. Shiva has received honorary doctorates from the University of Paris, the University of Western Ontario, University of Oslo, and Connecticut College as well. Among her many awards are the Alternative Nobel Prize, Right Livelihood Award in 1993, Order of the Golden Ark, Global 500 Award of the UN and Earth Day International Award, the Lenin Honour Grant for Peace Award 2009, Sydney Peace Prize in 2010, Doshi Bridge Builder Award, Calgary Peace Prize, Thomas Merton Award in 2011, and the list goes on and on and on. It's an honour for us, I know, as tangata whenua, tangata tiriti, to have her amongst us today and to share kōrero with us today in our kaupapa he Whenua Rongo. Nau mai haramai, Dr. Shiva.
Thank you, Jessica. Thank you. Jessica's mama picked me up, Joy. And to all of you who've gathered. I have made this long trip for friendship. I made the long trip to basically remind ourselves that in periods on the verge of collapse, of large parts of the planet's ecosystems collapsing, large amounts of society have already collapsed. The only way we can regenerate is in community. Yeah? Both as human community as well as the earth community. I was saying to Jessica, she's given heavy titles, right? And today's title is The Fall of Capitalist Patriarchy and the Rise of Diverse Living Economies. Now, if you think you can try your hand at figuring out both those things, then we already don't even need a session. Why did Maria Mies and I start talking about capitalist patriarchy? Everyone was talking about capitalism. And of course, lots of people were talking about patriarchy. But in terms of patriarchy, the domination of men over women, it was assumed that it's always been there in all societies. But we realized, Maria and I, that capitalist patriarchy got born with what has been given the name capitalism. But actually, if you really try and find out what it is, it's colonization, that's all it is. It was elevated to be a system of economics when it was really a system of plunder. And the fact that, a bunch of 300 rascals got together and wrote a charter and invented a new form, a new person, the corporation. Before 1600, the corporation did not exist. There have been businesses, women did business, men did business, indigenous people did business, enough to communicate with each other, enough to enrich their lives. But business with the main player as the corporation begins with East India Company. And I think New Zealand was also. Around when did they decide to come here? Their creation is 1600. When did the East India Company first come to this land? It was called the New Zealand Company, but when did they come? Oh, they take lots of time. Huh? You're further anyway. Well, they invented themselves in 1600, and really on the last day of 1600, they went with a charter to Queen Elizabeth. Just sign it. In effect, a corporation is a piece of paper. That's all it is, which creates artificial rights for an artificial being. Because it's just the piece of paper. And then, of course, in the charter that was written by the East India Company, it was also called the John's Company, because I think Mr. John took a lot of initiative to bring, they call them the merchant adventurers, the 300 merchant adventurers. And of course, this was a few hundred years after another merchant adventurer had been given the rights actually to come to India. They didn't know there was land in the middle. And that's why they call them the East India Company for England. But Columbus was coming to India and because we had spices and we had textiles. And that was the big trade of that time. We were 25% of the world's economy. And if you think of it, where do spices come from? The land, from biodiversity. And the spice growers of India did not destroy the land in spite of thousands of years of cultivation. And what I've noticed about the spice gardens of India is they never expand their spice gardens. They know exactly how much is good to have a good life. And about 90% of the land is kept for food and staples. Only 10% of the land is put under spices, unlike the greed economy, which basically doesn't know limits of any kind. And of course, Columbus lands in America. He discovered America, even though it was Columbus's error that he was there, and he called them the Indios. Why are the indigenous people of the Americas called Indians? It's Columbus's blunder. And I always say to my friends in North America, that his blunder united us, and we should now onwards work not through the lens of division and separation, because diversity is not about separation. Uniformity is about separation. Putting one yardstick for species that are different, languages that are different, cultures that are different, foods that are different. I've written a book called Monocultures of the Mind because I could not understand how diverse systems which produce 10 times, 20 times more food and nutrition are called unproductive and the world will starve. Just the other day I was addressing a national institute And I went through my entire critique of the Green Revolution. And at the end of it, this young person says, "But wouldn't we have starved?" I said, "I've just spent an hour explaining to you that when you protect the earth and protect biodiversity, you have more food and nutrition." And then I literally read out, I said, okay, the diverse system is giving you 9 units. The monoculture is giving you 4. Is 9 bigger or is 4 bigger? Now, these are people who are going to run our country, you know? But forget knowing the diversity of the world, they don't even know how to add and count. So the monoculture of the mind is a denial of diversity. And diversity is a recognition of self-organization. It's a recognition of freedom, because to be self-organized is to be free. It's, you know, that in all these years that I've now spent in this ecological work, 50 years, I've realized that what I learned through my quantum studies, actually the same principles apply to nature. And same principles apply to free societies. Yeah? But in the quantum world, there's nothing like a fixed entity. You know, there's no inertness, there's no non-change. Yeah? Everything is changing constantly. And it's not changing in thingness. It's not changing in stuffness. It's changing in potential. Very powerful concept. And, you know, they created things like IQ, totally cooked up category. Now, you give a young child the best of learning, no matter who that child is, they will grow to have full potential. In fact, the very word education is derived from the word educare, to cultivate the best potential. It's like cultivating a beautiful garden. Whereas we think now that cultivation is not the metaphor, that basically the head is empty and just has to be filled. And this metaphor of emptiness is really the big transition of capitalist patriarchy. Every indigenous culture has thought of the earth as living, and us as members of the earth's family. The earth defines us, culturally, materially, ethically, ecologically. But terra madre was converted into terra nullius. Yeah? So your neighbor Australia is where the legal language of terra nullius was first used. And what was it describing? It isn't that it was an empty land. No, but by defining the Aboriginal people as not human, and defining their ways of taking care of the largest estate on earth, as it's called, as not development. You know, when Captain Cook arrives, he's looking and saying, there's no sign of destruction, so they can't be human. So we take the worst behavior of the human being and treat that as the evolved human. And treat the people who have cared 65,000 years of farming. You know, that's the other mistake, you know. Bushmen, they call them. 65,000 years of farming. And now, of course, because people are finding out they had all these greens, as you're doing, I noticed there's a lot of plants here. I don't know if it's the season. But I want to take a yellow, I'm getting the Hindi name, shakarkandi. Not the squash, that we have enough of. Huh? Anyway, the meetha. Shakarkandi. Kumra. Basically, my mouth was watering, just thinking of it. So this one is just denying the existence of nature and diversity of people, and in defining them into non-existence. And when I did my earlier studies on and books on forestry, I remember they would say, even in a rich rainforest, most of the species are clearly weeds. Because it's just the one that you can commercially exploit. That should mean, and one reason the Canadians are having such horrible forest fires is because they're spraying Roundup on the forests of Canada. And that's killing all the broadleaf species that contribute to humus and therefore keep the forest moist. And in any case, Roundup is a desiccant, which is another reason why they're also using it in agriculture. They're telling people you don't have to dry the crop, just kill it. Yeah? Killing is more efficient. And so one is blindness to life, but the other is this pride, or an assumption of superiority and separation from nature as well as from each other, with the idea that somehow killing is a superior act, and loving and caring and regenerating is primitive. And I think we need to flip the civilizing mission. I think those who celebrate death need a dose of real civilization. The word civilization in our language is Sanskriti, you know, that which holds together. And we have a different word for destruction. In development, the word doesn't tell you it's destroying. But the word vikriti is change, but in a direction of destruction. Because we've celebrated the mechanistic thought so deeply, as long as something's moving. It could be moving in the wrong direction. But we've made change in and of itself without any direction, value, consequence as the measure. And the assumption that if things are being sustained and maintained, there's no change in it. So I always think of simple fact, you think of the atom, there's a nucleus, there's an electron moving around. The electron is constantly moving, but it's called a stationary state, as long as it doesn't collapse into the nucleus. But the mechanistic worldview thinks there's no movement if the change is within maintaining a living system. So, capitalist patriarchy for me is quite simply nature, her diversity, human beings, diverse cultures being replaced by a fictitious person called a corporation. And the image of this person is a rich bourgeois man. That's how it's defined. So there's a book that was written on integral economics by Ron E. Lessem and Alexander Scheffer, who said if the fathers of capitalist theory had chosen a mother rather than a single bourgeois male as the smallest economic unit for their theoretical constructions, they would not have been able to formulate the axiom of the selfish nature of human beings in the way they did. So that's the other shift. That selfishness is not what shapes us, even in nature. Poor Darwin, he wrote some good books. He wrote a beautiful book on the earthworm. He said by the time evolution's history is written, we'll realize the earthworm was the most important species that supported us. And the other one, on the roots, he called the root the brain of the plant. But all we know is the one he wrote about the survival of species. And he and Adam Smith were very close friends. I realize, we think all these fathers of science and economics and political theory, there were just 4 of them actually. And they all knew each other and they had dinner and whatever else but it was a small group of people. So Darwin, Malthus, Adam Smith were all close friends. And if you think of it, Bacon, who's called the father of modern science, and I never read him till I started becoming very active in the ecological movement. I said, what kind of mind is it that sees a forest as a timber mine? And how come my sisters who are defending the forest and saying we're going to hug the trees and doing chipko, and they see the forest as their mother, they see the forest as protecting the soil and the water and the air, and talking about these as the gifts of the forest. How are they, and then I realized that mechanistic philosophy. I said, who founded mechanistic philosophy? Mr. Bacon. Who was Mr. Bacon? He was not just the Chancellor of England, he was also the person in charge of the Inquisition, of the witch hunts. We've forgotten that even before colonialism was a papal bull to kill people who thought differently, or even more importantly, people who knew too much. If you think of it, it's all the women healers who were killed as witches. 9 million people killed. 9 million. And that then led to the violence of colonialism. Because the other mind of Europe was destroyed. And a very, very false narrative is that there was the church, and then rose modern science and replaced the church. Not at all true. There was a church, and the mechanistic philosophy was created in partnership with the church. And Boyle, who was the chair of the board of New England, he and the first director or president of the Royal Society, which, as Farrington said, when the Royal Society was announced in 1664, he said it's objective. One would think it's about knowledge. Yeah? It basically said, because in a little before that, our dear Bacon had written a book. Most people don't know about this book. It's called The Masculine Birth of Time. That now we have to make knowledge masculine. And we've got to destroy every effeminate idea that we are part of nature and nature's living. And so when the East India Company is established, Henry O. Goldenberg, the secretary, is saying its purpose is to raise a masculine philosophy. The mechanistic philosophy was seen as a masculine philosophy, whereby the mind of man may be ennobled with the knowledge of solid truths. in the real world, there's nothing like solid truth. Quantum theory has taught us that. What you have is change and flows. And as long as the flows are moving species to species, there's life. Yeah? The word currency used to mean that which flows. The stream, that I was told there's a creek next door, yeah? That water flows. Nutrition flows, you know. I realized that food is a currency. Air flows. The oxygen from the plants come to us. Everything that brings us life flows. Freely and permanently. But again, Mr. Locke, one of those other fathers, redefined currency for the first time to mean money. And the word invest, which used to mean make beautiful, was reduced to making money out of money. Short period of time, 4 or 5 men, trying to build, you know, they called themselves the fathers of this and fathers of that. In effect, they were banishing life. They were banishing the mothers. And I think that is the serious crisis. That this level of domination that must destroy the very foundations of life, in my view, it comes from a deep fear. It's fear of anything that is alive and alive in creating freedom for life. Otherwise, why? Why would the Monsantos of the world want to patent seed? Because they're afraid of seed that grows on its own and multiplies. It's a fear. Why would they want to control? I mean, my book, Water Wars, I've talked about how you have to control the river with large dams. You've got to rape the river to control the river. Yeah? But that mentality of constantly being afraid of life and freedom. So as I said, living systems are free by their very nature. They're self-organized and they're self-regulated. Nothing comes from outside to put them together. That act is engineering. You know, I go drill for some minerals here, cut some rubber trees for the tires, and then I can piece an automobile together. And now, of course, because people aren't thinking enough about the system as a whole, you know, they're getting very, very excited about more materials being used, more rare materials being used, mining of lithium and cobalt everywhere, just to be able to sell more automobiles and ruin the earth more. That is engineering. But a big part of engineering is to forget that nature has far more easier ways of doing the same job with no ecological damage. And all indigenous cultures have seen the earth and the land as the teacher. Instructions come not from power of a few to extract, dominate, manipulate, but it comes from the free power in all living systems. I've just finished a book which will come out any day because I think just like we forgot about life and we adopted mechanistic reductionism as the way of thinking. And in fact, the GMO debate is about this. Yeah? Is life a machine or is life self-organized complexity? And anyone who knows anything about life and living organisms knows it's self-organized complexity. And as I said, from the 70s onwards, I've been doing this work, and what I find is capitalist patriarchy only sees what it can exploit It's blind to diversity. It has a monoculture of the mind. It has a mechanistic mind. It has a militaristic mind. Because it comes from fear, it's only looking at tools of how to exterminate. That's all it is. But in the process, you have to do two other things. You have to basically say, Indigenous people don't know how to grow food. Indigenous people don't know how to heal themselves. Indigenous people don't know how to make shelters and buildings. So all that must be destroyed. You know, when I see the beautiful ways in which we created shelter as art, and now we've got a uniformity of cement all over the world. Yeah? Same ugly boxes, yeah? Blocking the soil, leading to runoff of the rain. I mean, if we just do an analysis of what's cement doing and what's cementification doing, you know, I think the materials we use end up shaping our imagination. So for sure, cement has cementified us. And the fossil fuels have fossilized us. And this way of shutting out large parts of reality is the mechanistic ideal. Do not see relationships, do not see interrelationship, interconnectedness, definitely self-organization. So capitalist patriarchy is at an end because it's destroying the very basis of everything that supports it. You know, when Maria Mies and I wrote ecofeminism, you know, we realized that everything that supports, including the whole issue of women's work. Yeah. You remove women's work, the whole edifice will collapse, because that's the subsidy that makes the rest run, particularly with more and more exploitation. I remember when the IMF and World Bank was imposing structural adjustment, and at the Beijing conference, it's the last women's summit that was held. At the Beijing conference, for those of us who were from the South on whom structural adjustment was being imposed, we knew that this is a patriarchal project. And what was happening is all of society was going into crisis, but people were surviving because women were doing 4 jobs, 5 jobs. As it is, they did most of the work, but now they had to do 4, 5 times more work in order for society to hold together. So what's the future, and how do we create it? Knowing that a system that destroys its very foundations, I just want to show you. This is an extractive system that doesn't replenish, it doesn't regenerate. It just takes what is profitable to it. It extracts the timber, it extracts the mineral, it extracts the soil fertility, it extracts the genes, it extracts what it can, and then creates something that nature doesn't create. It creates pollution, and it creates waste. Those are the 2 qualities of these systems. Whereas nature, there's nothing like waste and there's nothing like pollution. Everything is a cycle. You know? The output of one is the food of the other. And that's how it carries on forever. I have described these separations and walls that get built by capitalist patriarchy. I have called it, it's not just a domination over women, it's a domination of indigenous people. It's genocide. I remember I had to inaugurate the Canadian Human Rights Museum, and the evening before that, the indigenous people whose land had been taken for the museum came to meet me. And they said, not only did they take the land, but when we said, there's a part of the exhibition that should have our story on genocide, because 90% indigenous people were destroyed in the America. And they were told there's only one genocide, that which happened in Hitler's Germany. And indigenous peoples' killings cannot be referred to as genocide. Like there's an intellectual property right on the word genocide. I'm particularly happy because these days that the word ecocide is now getting deeply connected. And I know this will grow because not only is it reaffirming all the indigenous worldviews, do no harm, but it is also allowing the recognition of the sciences of life. That the earth is living, we are part of it, we are not separate. The idea of separateness is called apartheid in Southern African languages. That's why that regime was called apartheid. That I'm separate from you and I'm superior to you. Those two words characterize it. Separation and the assumption of superiority. Both are false assumptions because everything is interconnected. And there is no inequality, there's diversity. The microbe is not less than a mammal, as we will have noticed in the years of COVID. The little virus can drive us nuts in many ways. This assumption of superiority and separation is anthropocentrism, But within the anthropocentrism of human superiority to other species is the fact that within the human species, some are superior. And it is now reaching the ultimate stage of trying to rescue yourselves. So Silicon Valley, which made all the money, purely by taking patents on software. Bill Gates did, as in my book, Oneness versus 1% is true. Bill Gates didn't ever write a software program. He just stole it. Exactly like Monsanto cannot create a seed. He can shoot a toxic gene into it, but that's not making a seed as a self-organized complexity that renews itself, multiplies itself, and can exist forever through renewal. Silicon Valley, now the billionaires, when they say billionaires, tech billionaires, that's where it's all sitting. Because they're collecting rents from everything. Colonialism began by collecting rents from land, dispossessing the original custodians of land. We never believed we were property owners of land. We knew we are part of the earth. We don't own the earth, we don't own the land. But we are caretakers and we're custodians. Same for seed. But first land was turned into private property, and from the Indian situation, 45 trillion was transferred through rent collection from India to England. And the peasants who used to work the land, who now had to pay the rent, which was half of the average produce over years, now in cash. Even though they had grown enough rice, they starved to death. 60 million Indians starved to death. 60 million. And then with the seed, suddenly rent collections from seed. In India, 400,000 peasants have committed suicide. And we've done very detailed field work. 85% suicides are in the cotton area. 95% of the cotton is now a monopoly of Monsanto, the BT cotton. The whole software issue, you watch a program, pay a rent. I know Microsoft was going into hostels of every country, student hostels in universities, to check whether your program had been bought Or were you just borrowing it from a friend? A whole new software police has been created. Just like on the seed issue, once they decide all the seed is our monopoly, Percy Smizer, our dear friend, there's a seed police they're trying to institutionalize. They would, of course, love to have food police. You must have seen the huge uprisings of the farmers around the world this year. Yeah? That's because they're being absolutely squashed. You can't make a living. As it is, small farms have disappeared everywhere, just like small businesses disappeared during the lockdown. And that's why, to me, it's extremely important that for months the farmers are organizing and bringing, they have the tractors, and they bring their tractors into the town. And the wonderful thing is, ordinary people without any education of political kind are saying, we stand with the farmers, they give us food. They're not being turned into enemies of each other, because food, as I said, is a cycle. And as a cycle and as a flow, the soil, the land, the farmers, the eaters, we are all connected. And I always, when in the literature for green revolution, again, it's always made to look like green should only be for marketing and for being eaten by humans. I said, but agriculture is for all species, all beings. It's care for the earth. Yeah? The more organic matter you leave for the soil, the more the earth will give you. And when I started saving seeds in Navdanya, I remember I'd gone to the area in central India, Chhattisgarh. Chhattisgarh and Orissa are the sources of rice diversity. We have the Babalov Center. We took one grass, our peasants took one grass, and converted into 200,000 varieties of rice. And so I was there doing seed collections, and they had this very beautiful artwork. You would have seen them in our seed bank, Jessica, turned into art. And of course, typical, I said, oh, was there a festival? And they say to me, no, this is for the periods when the rice is not in the field, so the birds can have food. But they turned it into art. And the word invest had nothing to do with money. In the investiture ceremony, when you go and get your degree, that word invest is to beautify. And once a tribal farmer was sitting in a meeting with us, and he said, I must now rush to beautify the land. He didn't talk about farming as production, beautifying the earth. And I think that's part of what we have to do. I think the 4 or 5 shifts from capitalist patriarchy to new living economies. First, the earth is not dead, she's living. Simple. The earth is not dead. Second, nothing is separate, everything is interconnected. There's nothing like there are no superior sexes and genders, there's no superior races, there's no superior species. We're all interwoven in interconnectedness. And there's no hierarchy in these relationships. In interconnectedness, all there is interconnectedness. From the extractive system to the systems of constantly giving back in the flow of life, regenerating, giving back to the soil, saving the seeds, giving back the seeds, sharing in society. And from what I have experienced, the dominant system of economics takes abundant gifts of nature and systems that have been maintained by indigenous people and converts it into scarcity. How did we create scarcity in India and create famine? How did we create seed famines once Monsanto took patents? So what is called the economy is actually just the art of making money. Aristotle had a very powerful word for it. He called it chrematistics. He said, this is not economy. Economy is the art of living. Art of living with the rest of life. Yeah? In celebration, all the time. And that creates the abundance. So, the extractive system will, by its very nature, eventually convert a system of a stable system, you know. For example, if we were to put it pictorially, if you take the foundation as nature, and then the next is society and culture, and then is the market. But there's markets, which is an exchange between people, and there's the market, which is control and monopoly of corporations. One is with a capital M and is global, and the other is the many M's. So typically, a balanced system, if you keep extracting from this system, and you do it without limits, what happens is it becomes an upside-down pyramid, right? And what happens with an upside-down pyramid? It can topple with one whiff of a wind. So the issue is not just that we are getting more and more hazards. The point is we made the system so unstable that it cannot tolerate. We've lost all resilience, we've lost all immunity. And this graph I did to put together, you know, when we did WTO, when we did the work, I just found, before traveling, this old book we put together that shut down the WTO in Seattle. Because the only 3 agreements that are new are all related to food. The first is related to intellectual property and owning the seed. The second related to free trade, freedom for corporations, take away the freedom of people. And the third, which is the worst, I call it the law for food fascism, where the Cokes and the Pepsis write what is safety, and they shut down all local foods. They did that for India. And they set the standards of what's safe. So they can add, Coca-Cola adds antifreeze, you know, to give you the kick in the heat. Antifreeze in your drink. And the high fructose corn syrup that is giving diseases to everyone. Nobody is using real sugar anymore. Everyone is using high fructose corn syrup. So the real living economies mean we come back to the real currencies of life and we grow those currencies. Because being part of a living nature, we have that potential and capacity. We grow the currencies of food. We grow the currencies of water. That's water conservation. We grow biodiversity. We grow the seeds in the hands of people. And the living economies have to be, they can't be just linear extraction. They have to be giving economies. This morning, you know, I complimented Shanti about her beautiful earrings. And she mentioned to me that this stone can only be given as a gift. You cannot buy and sell it. It's a gift economy. And the gift economy is how abundance is created. But this linear extraction system has other models. We can do it differently. And the one I love and have been deeply inspired by is Gandhi, who's saying, I do not see the world as a pyramid, where the top crushes the bottom that supports it. The indigenous people, the women, the earth, the land. I want to grow a world composed of innumerable communities and circles of ever widening and never ascending circles. Yeah? Because a lot of people say, how are we going to scale up Navdanya? I say, we don't scale up, we scale out. Because in a world without verticality and hierarchy, radiating outwards. So we've got to stop using the word scale up. They love it, which is concentration. So we go, so ever widening, never ascending circles, till at last the whole becomes one life composed of individuals, never aggressive in their arrogance, but ever humble, sharing the majesty of the oceanic circle of which they are integral parts. That's the world we have to build. Thank you.
And I want to shift it up and actually just to open it up to the floor for half an hour while we have Dr. Shiva with us, and to open it up for some questions.
Kia ora, Dr. Shiva. Thank you so much for travelling such a long way to be here. I wanted to ask, you mentioned in your kōrero that you thought the fear from the capitalist patriarchy came from growth, and I'm wondering if maybe it comes from a fear or a lack of understanding of paradox, in the sense that is the true fear the fear of death, which is an idea that is revisited in our stories again and again, our fear of our own mortality. And I look at our systems that dominate the world now about endless growth without an understanding of the paradox that life is death. Could you say something to that?
Yeah, I don't think death is a paradox, it's just a cycle of life. And all cultures have dealt with it with beauty. You know, both my parents went with such preparation, welcoming the next stage of whatever is to come. But you are right, but I don't think it's fear of death, only it's the arrogance of deathlessness. Because if you look, Descartes was the other father of science, who really believed that, for example, if he chopped up a chicken and it was crying, he said it's just the squeaking of a machine. It's not any sentient being. And then he described himself as, I'm a thinking thing without a body. And this looking down on the body was a very big part of capitalist patriarchy. But all of Silicon Valley celebrates Descartes. And there's one of the people who's reincarnating that thinking, an obsolete thinking of that there's no life, there's no flow, there's no quality. Everything is weight and dimension, called it res extensa. Res cognitas was I have the brain, but the world is just measurement. And right now, there's a book out called The Spiritual Machine. Books talking about we human beings have to be improved. And the way we get improved is by making ourselves disappear and dissolving into the machine. And they call this transhumanism. In spirituality we talk about transcendentalism, that there are levels of consciousness beyond the shallow material existence. But they're really talking about not just the machine as smarter than us, even though what is called artificial intelligence is merely a sophisticated name for what's called machine learning. The machine is taught again and again and again how to download simple brain functions. Not the complex. There's the left brain and the right brain. They can download the mechanistic, analytic left brain functions. But this right brain functions of wisdom, of care, of compassion, of love, that cannot be downloaded into a machine. That is what we teach children through generation over generation over generation of values. So there is really a serious thinking of, it's basically denial of life, because everything living is born and it dies, Every part of every living system. I mean, if you look at how quickly our cells die and get replaced, Everything living is born and it dies. It's born, it's maintained, and it dies. But the overall system and organism doesn't disappear. And this idea of deathless existence, I have a dear friend who used to have a factory on liquid nitrogen, and then everything got outsourced to China. So once, he was crying because he couldn't buy his next fancy car, But 2 years later I went, and he had a very, very fancy car. I said, "What happened, Ravi?" He said, "All these people who don't want to die, they're freezing their bodies in nitrogen. And if they don't have enough money to freeze the whole body, they're freezing just the head, because everything is in the head." So there is, it's a serious business. It's very big, millions and millions each body being kept alive, without knowing that what really matters has moved on to take another form. So, these are big civilizational issues, And that's why some of us are now talking about ecological civilization, because our cultures were colonized by saying the destructive best was in a civilizational mission to save us, that we were inferior and we had to be saved. That's why I said we have to flip the idea of civilizing. Civilizing is that which cares for the earth, cares for each other, builds community. That's civilization. Civilization is not things that break up, that try and conquer, that try and reduce everything from its complexity to a single function. Worse, that try and get rid of so much of life. So 93% biodiversity is gone. But they're talking about 99% are useless people, Useless eaters, they talk about. Useless eaters. Won't be needed because artificial intelligence will get rid of it, And in India, the people who are specializing in these jobs, 40-50% are not getting jobs anymore. Because that shallow analytic work will be replaced. But what can't be replaced is our relationships. What can't be substituted is compassion, care, sharing, love.
Well, it's an honor to be in your company. I wanted to ask you a little about BlackRock. They seem to be quite active here in Aotearoa and setting about the process of greenwashing and creating green cities as a template. But what kind of, so it has this has me arguing with friends about what actually is good for the earth and what is not in regards to the level of propaganda with the greenwash. What tactics, strategies, or place of abiding do you have to advise in that way?
So, I mentioned my book, Oneness versus 1%, and I wrote it when Bill Gates took over the climate summit in Paris. But that's also around the time when Bayer bought Monsanto. So I wanted to see who's owning what, and how's all this happening. And my son, who helped me with this, we found out that every corporation, Monsanto and Bayer, Coca-Cola and Pepsi, 75% ownership is in the hands of these new giant investment firms, where the rich people's money sits. And BlackRock and Vanguard and State Street, 5 of them control all. They set the rules. Like when you mentioned this morning about the corporations writing the rules. But now the corporations are not writing the rules, they're owners. Because the shareholders are now the even bigger owners. And BlackRock and both Vanguard For them, basically money is absolute, money is God. Yeah? And re-engineering society. So there's so much homelessness in America now, even though having a home for every middle-class person was the American dream. 60% of the private homes are now owned by by BlackRock. And what they would like to do is take the, everything that is given by nature, whether it's the rivers or the water, the land, the soil, the biodiversity, they have always been in the commons. Yeah? And they're common goods because everyone needs them. Everything that was a common and a basic need is exactly where the focus of control is. So how do we deal with it? Reclaim the commons, build the community. It's not easy. When I say it, I'm not saying it in terms of, in a time where society is fragmented, building community is not easy, but building community is necessary. Without being able to build community, we will not be able to reclaim our ability to provide for ourselves. Then we'll be either dependent or dispensable. Yeah? Because if 5 of you can get together and build a home, but without community you need capital. And capital is what people don't have. So the substitute to capital is community.
Any other pātai? Hands up just so I can see people. Kapai, Lani.
Tēnā koe. Thank you for the reminder that it was only a small number of men, and then looking at this room, at the incredible Indigenous women that have done this work for so long. It's like, surely we're going to change it up. And my question to you is, I was wondering, what do you see as missing in the movement to create that change from a system of plunder to a system of reciprocity or love?
I think we are engineered into silos. And while we must recognize diversity, we must not allow our diversity to be manipulated into a divide and rule strategy, which has always been done in colonialism, always, whether it's religion or, just create hierarchies and separations, and then don't allow people to unite with their diversity. The point is, diversity is not the block. In fact, in ecology, I can tell you, without diversity, you cannot have flow. It's when the soil organisms can give to the plant and the plant can give to the soil. It's because they're different. The plant is not a mycorrhizal fungi. And because they're different, they can have mutuality and symbiosis. So I think the big obstruction really has been every time something starts to grow. I remember when we shut down WTO in Seattle, we created the International Forum on Globalization. The Trade Secretary of US, I think his name was Zolik, he wrote a piece in the Herald Tribune that the anti-globalization movement is terrorists. All he had to do is put that name, And so 3 things we need to do as community is know we are diverse, celebrate our diversity, and never allow the powerful to divide us. The second thing, through our diversity, we must relish how we can be mutually supportive to each other. And the third thing for sure we need to do is every time we are defined as lacking, we need to reflect on how full our lives are and how rich our potential can be. We are always defined through lack. The earth is defined through lack. Terra nullius, there's nothing there. You know, even the idea of growth. You know, my dear friend Marilyn Waring and I used to train the Norwegians to build the women's research program. I'd done Staying Alive, my book, and she had done If Women Counted. And there's a part in it where, you know, she wanted money for women and children, and she didn't get it. And every time they wanted money for a submarine or some defense, they got the money. So she said, why is it that they get the money and we don't? So she followed the accounting system of GNP, GDP, went all the way to the United Nations, and found that after the war, when they created growth to finance war, continued war, the definition of growth of GDP and GNP is, if you produce what you consume, you don't produce. So the wonderful meal you are having here, it doesn't exist. So everything then gets reduced to zero, and the part that is not zero, like pollution, is turned into net. Net means not absolute. Yeah? So when you talked about the whole fake climate solutions, it's always abstracted categories that the dominant system counts. Tell me an indigenous person who sits and counts growth. Tell me a concerned environmentalist who sits and calculates net zero. Who's calculating net zero? BlackRock, McKinsey. How can we play a new trick to create new markets in pollution? Yeah? So, yeah, I think clarity, honesty, integrity, they are what give us strength.
Kia ora, tēnā koe, Vandana. I'm here with my little whānau, Frida and Tuanuku today. We're from a little small town up north in the Northland area, Whangarei. We live on the east coast, and we're from a permaculture, syntropic agroforestry education and research centre. And you're welcome to come and visit on your time here. Nau mai haere mai. And the question I have for you is have you got any advice on how these rōpū that we've got down the front here, the waka kaiora rōpū, the ngātoki whakarururanga rōpūs and WISE 262, these kinds of entities or bodies that are representing Māori and Indigenous rights to decolonise Aotearoa, Nuterene Aotearoa from the things of Roundup. How do we get that off our whenua? You know, I know you're massively passionate about glyphosate and removing it from the way in which we kill our crops before we harvest them and these things, but how do we actually eliminate that from importing those things into our whenuas? What advice have you got for us as individuals, but specifically for our rōpū that are in these big discussions with Kaunihara, Crown and stuff like this to actually eliminate that stuff from coming in? Thank you.
Yeah, as a principal, I don't give advice because I don't think I'm in a position to know more than you about what you know. Yeah? I can just share with you my concerns. You know, when in '87 I first heard the corporations talking about patenting seed and pushing GMOs, it was at a meeting in '87. That's when I started to save seed. And I started to save seeds with a simple commitment that seed is not a machine invented by Monsanto, and therefore it cannot have a patent, and therefore there was no patents on life. Yeah, no patents on life.
Yeah.
Is ethical ontological reality, and the rest is bluff. Yeah? So we must just know the honesty of what the seed is, and farmers need to have seed in order to not be driven to debt and suicide, and for our food diversity to not disappear. I think right now, the food and seed issue is going to get more important, and we'll have time tomorrow to talk more about this. Just at that time, the issue was to bring GMO seeds. Now the big commitment by Silicon Valley and Bill Gates is to make real food illegal and force fake food. Yeah? And that's why defending all this and growing it and making it available is the freedom. Is the freedom. Grow your food, grow your food, grow your food. Share your food.